Ciudad Juarez. While most of the city was still asleep, a convoy of armored trucks rolled toward the gates of CESO 3 prison. Within seconds, the sound of automatic gunfire shattered the morning air. Guards dropped before they could reach their radios. Fires ignited inside the cell blocks. The air filled with smoke, shouting, and the crack of rifle rounds echoing off concrete. Gunfire erupted in perfect sync, bursts from outside the walls met by an uprising from within. The shooters moved with purpose, their targets pre-selected. Their timing was exact. In less than 10 minutes, more than 30 inmates slipped into the streets. Among them was the man the prison feared most, Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz. To the public he was El Meto. To the men who served him he was untouchable. For over a decade, he'd turned a high-security prison into the headquarters of Los Mexicos, running drug routes, ordering murders, and bribing the guards meant to control him. From his cell, he ruled with absolute authority until this morning when the walls no longer held him. 4 days later, the manhunt ended in a crash, a gunfight, and a body lying in the back of a government truck. This is the story of how El Nido built an empire from inside a cell and how it all came apart in one violent week. CESO 3 sat on the edge of Ciudad Juarez, a short drive from the U.S. border. On paper, it was a high-security state prison designed to contain Mexico's most dangerous criminals. In practice, it operated as a stronghold. The guards wore the uniforms, but authority rested with the gangs inside. Over time, control shifted completely to inmate leadership, and Los Mexicos dominated every block. For the right price, anything could enter. Weapons, drugs, mobile phones, even furniture and appliances moved through the gates without resistance. Guards either accepted payment or avoided confrontation altogether. By 2022, sections of the facility no longer resembled prison housing. Some cells contained jacuzzis, large televisions, sound systems, stocked bars, and safes filled with cash. This was not contraband hidden away from sight. It was openly part of daily life inside O, and at the center of it was Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz, known as El Nato. His authority extended through every wing of the prison, and his decisions dictated how it operated. Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz was born in the early 1990s in northern Mexico. The city he grew up in was already a battlefield for rival cartels, and the streets offered only two real paths: be exploited by the violence or join it. By his late teens, El Meto had chosen his side. His name was tied to kidnappings, armed robberies, and targeted executions across the state of Chihuahua. He found his place inside Los Mexicos' S-based street gang with deep ties to the Sinaloa cartel. Ambitious, calculating, and ruthless, he rose quickly through their ranks. His reputation was built on precision. In 2009, at just 18, his career hit its first wall. Police linked him to multiple kidnappings and murders. He was captured, tried, and handed a sentence that was supposed to keep him locked up for life. 224 years. For most men, that would have been the end. For El Nato, it was only a change of address. From inside CESO 3, he adapted instantly. Here built his network using visits, bribed guards, and smuggled cell phones to stay connected to the outside. Soon his orders were being carried out hundreds of miles beyond the prison walls. Drug shipments moved on his command. Extortion rackets fed him cash every week. Enemies both inside and outside were eliminated without him ever leaving his cell. Over time, the prison became more than just his base of operations. It became his territory. And by 2022, El Meto wasn't just another inmate. He was the most powerful man in CESO 3 and one of the most feared in Juarez. But by August 2022, the state government authorized a high-security transfer. Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz would be moved out of CESO 3 and sent to a federal supermax far from Juarez. The aim was clear: remove him from his base, strip him of the command he had built inside those walls. News of the decision didn't remain in official channels for long. Inside the prison, messages traveled fast. By the time afternoon arrived, El Meto was aware of every detail: the route, the timing, the intent behind it. That day, Juarez erupted. A grocery store became the first scene. 2 armed men entered, opened fire on the customers, and left without taking a single peso. Minutes later, flames swallowed a convenience store across town. Within the hour, vehicles were burning on public roads, blocking intersections. A bus was stopped, passengers ordered out, and Thief Hickle set a light in the middle of the street. There was no coordination in the targets, only in the purpose. Shops, restaurants, street vendors, anyone, anywhere could be struck. In the late afternoon, a well-known radio host left his station and collapsed before reaching his car. Witnesses said they never saw the shooter. In another neighborhood, a mechanic finishing his shift was cut down outside his shop. By nightfall, 11 people were dead. Most had no connection to organized crime. The state abandoned the transfer the next morning. The decision wasn't explained. Officials avoided questions. Inside Story So 3, the message had been delivered and received. A prison cell did nothing to weaken El Nido's reach. The smoke from Black Thursday lingered over Juarez for days. Streets were quieter, stores closed earlier. The city moved with caution, as if everyone understood that the violence could return at any moment. Inside CISO 3, their action was different. El Mito had forced the state to retreat. The transfer had been canceled. He remained in control. But the events of August Hashim something else. The government was willing to make a move against him that wouldn't be forgotten. From that moment, the focus shifted. Instead of retaliating, he began preparing. The plan wasn't rushed. It developed in fragments, a conversation during yard time, a coded message smuggled out through a visitor. Instructions passed between trusted men in the laundry detail. Weapons were brought in gradually. Some arrived hidden in supply trucks, others in smaller pieces that were assembled inside. Ammunition was stored in places where guards rarely looked or where they'd been paid not to look at all. The right people were approached. A guard who needed money for a sick relative. Another who had already turned a blind eye to smaller favors. Some took cash, others took threats. Either way, they agreed to play their part. By October, the framework was in place. 2 teams on the outside would coordinate with inmates on the inside. The outside teams would arrive heavily armed in armored vehicles to draw fire and overwhelm the gate. The inside teams would ignite chaos, setting fires, freeing key prisoners, and breaking formation in the yard to open the way. The escape wouldn't just depend on force, it depended on timing. The day had to be one where security was at its weakest. When guard numbers were low and attention is divided, New Year's Day fit perfectly. Most of the city would be sleeping off the night before. Many officers would be distracted or absent. The usual morning routines would be slower, the checks less strict. Through November and December, the pieces kept falling into place. Prison routines were studied. Schedules were memorized. Escape routes, from the facility, were mapped to the minute. Outside vehicles were reinforced, weapons were tested, and the attack plan was rehearsed in safe houses. By the final week of the year, those involved knew their roles by heart. Who would fire the first shots? Who would open the gates? Who would cover the escape? And most importantly, who would make sure that Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz disappeared into Thessaly? When the morning of January 1st arrived, everything was in place. The plan was set. The rules decided. The orders were clear. Move fast. Hit hard, and make sure no one could stop them. The sun was just beginning to push through the cold morning haze over Sudatares. Most of the city was still asleep. Fireworks from the night before lay scattered in the streets, their smoke long gone. At Seso, the day began quietly. The main gate was staffed, but the pace was slow. Guards were changing shifts, some talking about the celebrations of the night before. A few inmates lingered near the yard, their movements giving no sign of what was about to happen. Then at 7 a.m., a convoy appeared on the road. 3 armored trucks were moving in formation, slowing as they neared the prison. No headlights, no sirens, just the steady rumble of engines rolling closer. The trucks stopped at the gate. In the next breath, the silence shattered. Gunfire erupted in controlled bursts. The first rounds tore into the guard posts, cutting down those inside before they could react. Others tried to take cover but were caught in the open. Inside, the signal had already been given. Inmates broke from their morning routines. Some ran toward the smoke with weapons in hand. Others lit fires, mattresses, and trash igniting instantly, filling the corridors with thick black clouds. The attack moved in two directions at once. Outside, Giman advanced in short, sharp bursts, forcing the remaining guards to stay pinned. Inside, cell doors opened one after another, releasing the men who'd been handpicked for the escape. The noise was constant. The crack of rifles, the shouts in the yard, the roar off lanes as the fire spread. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Shadows moved fast through the smoke, indistinguishable until they were already close. Within minutes, the first group of inmates reached the breached gate. Some ran directly for the waiting vehicles. Others disappeared into side streets, scattering before any reinforcements could arrive. Amid the chaos, one figure stayed close to the center of the movement, flanked by armed men who never left his side. El Neto. By the time the shooting began to fade, the damage was irreversible. 10 guards were dead. 7 inmates lay where they'd fallen. More than 24 had made it out. El Neto was gone. Within hours of the escape, the Mexican Army and the National Guard surrounded CESO 3. Armored vehicles blocked every road leading to the prison. When they reached the interior, the battle was over. The gunmen were gone. The surviving guards stood, in shock, some wounded, some silent, staring at the destruction around them. But what the soldiers found inside was more than the aftermath of an attack. It was proof that CESO 3 had been lost long before that morning. In one cell, they discovered a safe stuffed with stacks of pesos, 1.7 million in cash. In another, a flat-screen television sat against the wall, next to a jacuzzi still filled with water. Weapons were everywhere. Handguns, rifles, and boxes of ammunition lay within arm's reach of bunk beds. Cell phones were recovered from inmate quarters. Methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and fentanyl were pulled from hiding places that had clearly been in use for months, maybe years. Some sections of the prison didn't even look like inmate housing. They resembled private apartments, stocked kitchens, expensive furniture, decorative lighting. In certain blocks, soldiers found doors that led into restricted areas where prisoners should never have been allowed. It was clear that the attack on New Year's Day hadn't forced the gates open. Those gates had already been unlocked, not physically, but through years of compromise, bribes, and fear. The prison director was removed from his post before the day was over. Investigations into dozens of guards began immediately, when high-risk inmates were loaded onto buses and sent to federal facilities across the country. Yet even with soldiers in control, the scale of what they had uncovered sent a deeper message. This wasn't just a security breach. It was a system that had been surrendered from the inside. And now the man who had ruled it was somewhere on the streets, backed by an armed network that had already proven it could strike without warning. By the afternoon of January 1st, the escape was national news. Images of armored trucks outside CESO 03 looped on television screens. The number of fugitives shifted with each official briefing. First 25, then 27, then around 30, but one name remained constant: Ernesto Alfredo Pinan de Cruz. 200 soldiers were deployed across Ciudad, whereas within hours, federal police and National Guard units spread out along the highways, manned checkpoints, and began sweeping rural roads leading toward the border. The United States closed its ports of entry on the Harris-El Paso crossings to inspect every vehicle. Airports were quietly put on alert. Rewards were announced: 300,000 pesos for minor escapes, 5 million for information leading to El Neto. For the first 2 days, the search was methodical. Officers raided stash houses, questioned suspected associates, and tracked down vehicles abandoned near the city limits. Then, on January 3rd, the manhunt turned bloody. A group of state investigators trailing leads in the southern part of the city drove straight into an ambush. Automatic gunfire ripped into their vehicles. 2 officers were killed instantly. The rest returned fire, and by the time reinforcements arrived, 5 attackers laid head on the street. The message was unmistakable: Los Mexico were willing to fight for him in open daylight. Torres felt the pressure. Schools closed. Businesses locked their doors before noon and the streets empty after dark. The city waited for the next move. Unsure if it would come from the authorities or Alito's men, 2 days, passed in tense silence. Then before dawn on January 5th, federal intelligence units received a location, a house in Colonia Asticus, one of the most volatile neighborhoods in Harris. The source claimed Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz was inside. Agents moved fast. Unmarked trucks rolled in without lights, engines low, stopping just short of the block. Armed teams fanned out, surrounding the property from every angle. For minutes, nothing moved. Then a figure appeared at the front door. Elmedo stepped out wearing body armor, a pistol in his hand. He ran straight to a black armored car parked at the curb. The engine roared as he pulled away, tires spitting gravel into the dark. The convoy followed. The chase cut through empty streets, engines echoing between concrete walls. Every turn brought them closer, the gap closing with each block. Minutes in, the cars slammed into the side of a gas station. The impact crumpled the front end and sent a wave of debris across the pavement. Elmedo climbed out, firing before his feet even hit the ground. Bullets shattered glass, sparking against metal. Agents returned fire, closing in from both sides. Several rounds struck him. He stumbled but kept moving, still squeezing the trigger. Until his weapon clicked empty, agents rushed forward, wrestled him to the ground and pulled the pistol from his hand. He was loaded into the back of a government truck, bleeding heavily. Minutes later, while being transported to the hospital, he stopped breathing. The man who had ruled Seso III for over a decade is now dead. News of El Nato's death spread across Juarez before sunrise. Hours after the announcement, gunmen linked to Los Mexicos torched 2 convenience stores and opened fire on the state prosecutor's office, the same agency that had confirmed his death. There was no tactical gain in the attacks. They were an answer, a reminder that his reach hadn't disappeared overnight. In the days that followed, authorities moved to seal every crack in the prison system they could. 191 high-risk inmates from Seso III were transferred to federal facilities. The prison director was removed. Dozens of guards were placed under investigation for allowing years of contraband, luxury, and unrestricted movement inside the facility. Officials promise reforms, no more special treatment for cartel leaders, immediate transfers to isolated supermax prisons, stricter inspections, and tighter control. All stuff for the families of the 10 guards killed in the escape and the civilians lost in Black Thursday. The grief was raw. Public anger didn't fade quickly. Many in Juarez were left asking the same question. How could this happen twice in the same year? Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz was gone, but the network he built remained. Los Mexicos still operated in the city, still held territory, and still had men on the inside of prisons across the state. But the question remained, and if one man could run an empire from inside a cell, how many others are doing it right now,